The day started quietly for her. She had spent the morning speaking at a small community event on the east side of the city, something she did often because she loved encouraging young entrepreneurs who reminded her of her younger self. She wore simple clothes that day, nothing flashy, just a soft sweater and dark slacks, the kind of outfit that made her blend easily into any crowd. She didn't look like someone who oversaw hundreds of employees or someone whose decisions shaped big contracts. She looked like any other hardworking woman going about her day, and that was exactly how she liked it. After the event, she checked the time and realized she still had a short break before her next meeting. She thought it would be a good time to stop by the bank and make a quick withdrawal for an upcoming donation she planned to give quietly. She preferred handing support directly to people instead of making it a big public show. So she drove to the branch she had used since she was much younger, long before her business grew into what it had become. She liked this branch because it felt familiar. It's almost like a small part of her old life that had never changed. When she walked in, the bank was not too busy. A few customers were in line, some filling forms, and a couple of employees at their desks were helping people with questions. She took her place in the line like everyone else. She never expected special treatment and didn't want any. She simply wanted to get her withdrawal and continue with her day. While she waited, she noticed the staff behind the counters. Some looked tired, some looked stressed, but most were doing their jobs with the usual quiet focus. Only one person stood out, the supervisor. A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes who seemed more interested in controlling the room than helping anyone. The supervisor's voice carried across the space every time she spoke, and her tone always sounded like she was slightly annoyed with everyone. When it was finally her turn, she stepped forward with a warm smile. She always tried to be polite to service workers because she remembered the days she stood behind counters herself, working late shifts, and trying to stay cheerful for customers who didn't always return the kindness. But the moment the supervisor saw her, something shifted in the woman's expression. She narrowed her eyes slightly, as if trying to figure her out. The CEO introduced herself with a simple greeting, not mentioning her title or who she was. She placed her bank card on the counter and gave the amount she wanted to withdraw. It wasn't the largest withdrawal she had ever made, but it was still significant enough to follow standard verification. She expected that. She always understood the rules and was prepared for them, instead of asking for her ID or starting the verification. The supervisor leaned back and crossed her arms. "That's a very large amount," she said, her tone heavy and suspicious, as if she had already decided something was wrong. The CEO nodded calmly. "Yes, I understand. I have my ID right here if you need it." But the supervisor didn't take the ID. She didn't even reach for the bank card. She just stared at her for a few seconds, then shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure we can do that for you today," she said, as though she were denying something dangerous instead of a routine transaction. A couple of people nearby glanced over, sensing the tension. The CEO kept her voice steady. "Is there a problem? I've made withdrawals like this many times." The supervisor gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Well, you might have, but we need to be extra careful with requests like this. You understand, right? People try things." The CEO felt the implication behind those words. She didn't show any anger. She didn't even sigh. She simply continued offering her documents. "Here's my ID, and you can also check my account profile. Everything should match." Still, the supervisor didn't take the card or the ID. She didn't type anything into the computer. She didn't look at the screen. Instead, she gave a look that almost seemed to say she had already made up her mind. "I just don't think this looks right," the woman said. "People don't usually walk in dressed like that and ask for that kind of withdrawal. We have to use our judgment too." The CEO stood quietly. Her outfit was clean and simple. There was nothing unusual about it, but she knew the truth. Some people judged first and asked questions later. She didn't want to create a scene. She didn't want anyone around to feel uncomfortable. So she kept her tone soft and respectful. "My documents are here," she said again. "Please verify them. I'm happy to wait if you need time." But the supervisor lifted a hand, almost brushing away the words. No, I'm not doing this without something more. Maybe you should come back with more proof. Maybe bring the person who actually owns the account." The woman smiled in a way that was not friendly. The CEO felt a small sting inside. Not because of the insult, but because she had seen this type of treatment many times directed toward people who didn't deserve it. She didn't want to think the worst of the supervisor, but the message was clear. The woman didn't think she looked like someone who had a high-value account. She didn't think she belonged. And she didn't even try to hide that thought. A man behind the CEO stepped back slightly, uncomfortable with the situation. Another customer pretended to fill out a form while watching quietly. A younger employee behind another counter froze in place, clearly unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. No one wanted to make things worse, but the tension in the room was unmistakable. The CEO kept her calm because she knew losing. Her temper would only give the supervisor more excuses. She spoke gently. "This is a simple verification process. You can check my account profile. You'll see everything is in order." The supervisor folded her arms tighter, as if trying to protect her authority. "I said no. I'm not processing this. You can go to another branch if you want. This is not happening today." It was the firmness in the supervisor's voice that surprised the room. It wasn't a request. It wasn't caution. It was final, as though she were shutting a door she didn't want to open. The CEO paused for a long moment. Inside, she felt a mix of disappointment and quiet sadness. She didn't expect special treatment, but she did expect fair treatment. And fairness was clearly not something she was receiving today. She took a slow breath and picked up her ID and card. Her voice stayed steady and almost gentle. "Before I leave, can I ask you one thing?" she said. The supervisor raised an eyebrow, already impatient. "Did you refuse this transaction because the documents were not valid?" the CEO asked softly. "Or because of how you think I look?" The supervisor's expression tightened for a fraction of a second, just enough for the people watching to notice. Before she said, "I refused because I can." "That's enough." Those words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable, as if the room itself knew something had gone wrong. The CEO nodded slowly. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even ask for a manager. She simply stepped aside, walked to an empty corner of the bank, and took out her phone. She made one short call. She didn't complain or retell the story. She simply said, "I'm at the branch now. If you're still nearby, please come in when you can." She hung up, slipped her phone back into her bag, and waited quietly with the soft patience of someone who knew exactly who she was, someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The supervisor watched her from the counter, still wearing that dismissive look, not realizing that the next few minutes would change everything in that bank, and that the quiet woman she had just dismissed was not only the account holder, but someone with far more authority than she could have imagined. She stood quietly in the corner of the bank after making that short phone call, not wanting to draw any more attention to herself. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was simply disappointed by how easily someone could treat another person with disrespect without even taking a few seconds to verify the truth. She had seen things like this before, not just toward her, but toward many others who never said a word about it. She thought about all the people who would have walked out of the bank feeling small or embarrassed, just because someone in charge decided they didn't look like they belonged. It bothered her deeply. She glanced around the room. A young man filling out a deposit slip kept looking at her as if he wanted to ask if she was okay, but he didn't seem brave enough to do it. An older woman holding a check looked uncomfortable, her eyes moving back and forth between the supervisor and the CEO, like she was watching a moment she wished she didn't have to see. Some people pretended they weren't paying attention at all. Their body language said otherwise. The supervisor, on the other hand, looked pleased with herself. She was rearranging papers on her desk as if she had settled a major issue. Every now and then, she shot a quick glance toward the CEO, almost like she expected her to leave quietly out of embarrassment. The supervisor didn't know anything about the woman she had dismissed. She didn't know her history, her struggles, her achievements, or her power. She didn't know how many people depended on her guidance every day. She only saw simple clothing and a quiet voice, and from that alone she had judged her. Minutes passed slowly, and the room stayed tense. The CEO didn't fidget or shift around. She didn't sigh or tap her foot. She stood with the patience of someone who understood time differently, someone who didn't rush to prove herself to anyone. Her calmness seemed strange to some of the people watching. But that calmness had carried her through many situations far harder than this. Then, the door opened. Two people walked in, both dressed in formal business clothing, the kind that suggested they weren't average customers. They stepped inside with purposeful strides, scanning the room quickly until they saw her. Their expressions softened immediately, and they approached her with quick, respectful steps. "Thank you for waiting," one of them said quietly. "We came as soon as we got your message." Supervisor at the counter froze mid-step. She watched the new arrivals walk straight to the woman she had just refused service to. Something in her face shifted, but she stayed silent. Not yet understanding what was happening, the customers in line stepped aside instinctively. Sensing that these newcomers were not ordinary staff or visitors, the CEO nodded to them gently. "I appreciate you coming," she said, still keeping her voice low so the whole room wouldn't hear. "I didn't want to make this a big scene." "You didn't?" one of them assured her. "We're here to address it properly." The supervisor blinked. Realizing that the two individuals were from upper management people with much more authority than anyone working the counters, she tried to return to her confident posture. But her hands suddenly looked stiff as she placed them on the counter. The managers asked the CEO softly, "Would you like to step into one of the offices?" "We can speak there." She shook her head. "Not yet. Let's handle the important part first." They nodded respectfully. Without raising her voice, she explained exactly what had happened. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't add emotion. She simply told the story as it was. From the moment she approached the counter to the moment her transaction was refused, without a single form of verification. Every word was quiet but clear, and the truth in her voice hung in the air like something undeniable. The managers listened carefully, their expressions darkening with concern. When she finished, they both turned toward the supervisor. "Is this accurate?" one of them asked, giving the supervisor a chance to explain herself. The supervisor opened her mouth quickly, trying to sound confident. "Well, I was just following procedures." She asked for a large withdrawal, and she didn't look like she stopped herself too late. Her eyes widened, realizing how bad that sentence already sounded. "You didn't look like what?" the manager asked sharply, but not in a raised voice. It was the kind of question that held someone still. The supervisor swallowed hard. "I just meant, she didn't present herself the way people normally do for transactions like that. She offered her ID," the manager asked. "Yes, but she offered her bank card." "Well, yes, but I needed more certainty." "And you didn't check the account? You didn't enter her information? You didn't even look at the documents?" The supervisor's face turned a shade paler. "I was trying to prevent fraud." The manager nodded slowly with a tight jaw. By refusing to verify the documents and refusing the standard checks, the supervisor tried to speak, but nothing came out this time. Her confidence from earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by a silent panic that showed in her trembling fingers. The CEO remained silent, watching with the same calm expression she had carried from the beginning. She didn't need to argue. The truth was speaking loudly enough. A customer in line whispered to another, "She didn't even check the ID." "I was standing right here." Another customer nodded in agreement, confirming what happened. The manager straightened up. "Do you realize who you just refused service to?" The supervisor blinked again, confused. "I don't know what you mean." The manager turned slightly, motioning toward the CEO with a respectful gesture. "She is not only a valid account holder, she is one of the most important corporate clients this bank has. Her company's partnership with us is one of the largest agreements we maintain in this entire region." Gasps spread quietly among the customers. The younger employee at the back nearly dropped the pen he was holding. The supervisor seemed stunned. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened a little, as if she had just realized she had stepped into a situation she had no preparation for. "I didn't know," she stuttered. "That's the problem," the CEO said softly. Her voice was not harsh. It was almost sad. "You didn't even try to know." The supervisor looked down ashamed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. It was just judgment. A mistake." The CEO didn't respond right away. She looked around the room, seeing the faces of customers who might have experienced similar moments without anyone stepping in for them. She thought about all the times people were treated unfairly simply because someone behind a counter decided they weren't worth patience. The managers looked at her, waiting for guidance. They knew her influence. They knew how seriously the bank took her account. But more than that, they respected her as a leader who believed in fairness. "What would you like us to do?" one manager asked quietly. The supervisor took a shaky breath, anticipating the answer but hoping for mercy she wasn't sure she deserved. The CEO looked at her for a long moment, then at the staff behind the counters, the ones who had watched silently, unsure whether they were allowed to intervene. None of them had spoken up, but many had recognized the disrespect happening right in front of them. She finally spoke, her voice low and steady. "This is not about me. It's about how any customer walking in here might be treated. I don't want this to happen to anyone else." The manager nodded. "Understood." The supervisor lowered her head, waiting for whatever decision would follow, but the CEO didn't deliver the final words yet. She simply said, "We'll finish this discussion after my transaction is completed. Let's handle that first." The manager immediately stepped forward. "Of course. We'll take care of it right now." They guided her to the counter beside the supervisors, where another employee, shaken but eager to do things correctly, began processing the withdrawal with utmost care. The manager stood beside the employee, ensuring everything was smooth and respectful. As the process went on, customers whispered to one another. Some nodded approvingly. Some looked stunned. Some looked relieved, like they had witnessed something important, not just a misunderstanding, but a moment that revealed something deeper about assumptions and respect. The supervisor stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her earlier confidence completely gone. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but the weight of her choices pressed heavily on her, and the CEO, still calm and still composed, waited patiently for the transaction she should have received without any trouble in the first place, knowing the next few minutes would define the rest of the day for everyone in the building. The withdrawal was still being processed at the side counter, but the atmosphere inside the bank had completely changed. The room that once felt tense and uncomfortable now felt like it was holding its breath. Every person in the building seemed to know that something important was unfolding. Even if they didn't understand the full depth of it, the employee helping with the transaction worked carefully, double-checking every number as if afraid of making a single error. His hands shook slightly, not because he feared the CEO, but because he had watched how unfairly she had been treated only minutes earlier. He seemed almost relieved that he had not been the one to refuse her, and he wanted to do everything right to show her the respect he felt she deserved from the start. The manager stood beside him, quietly. Every now and then, the manager glanced toward the supervisor, who remained at her counter trying to appear busy. Her hands shuffled papers that didn't need to be moved, and her eyes kept darting around the room. She seemed aware that every person in the lobby had seen the shift in authority, and it made her uncomfortable in a way she wasn't used to. The CEO remained still as she waited. She didn't gloat. She didn't stare at the supervisor. She didn't try to make anyone feel guilty or small. Instead, she looked around the bank with a gentle calm that felt out of place in such a tense moment. It was as if she was trying to give everyone in the room a chance to gather themselves before things moved forward again. The customers slowly eased back into their own thoughts, though many kept watching with quiet curiosity. One elderly man gave the CEO a soft smile, as if he admired the grace she had shown. A younger woman with a toddler whispered to her child to behave, not wanting to disturb the seriousness of the moment. The bank felt unusually quiet for a weekday afternoon, as though the air itself was waiting. At last, the employee handed her the receipt and the envelope containing the withdrawal. "Everything is completed," he said softly. "Thank you for your patience." She gave him a small, sincere smile. "Thank you for your kindness." The simplicity of her gratitude seemed to relax him. His shoulders dropped slightly, as if he had been holding tension he didn't even realize. That single expression of appreciation meant more to him than she probably knew, but the done transaction didn't mean the situation was over. The moment she turned back toward the managers, everyone in the bank seemed to straighten. Even the people who tried not to listen couldn't help but pay closer attention now. Something about the way the managers looked at her made it clear that the next few minutes mattered. The manager closest to her spoke first. "Would you like to step into one of the offices now?" he asked quietly. She shook her head gently. "No, it's better we speak here." The other manager nodded with understanding. This wasn't meant to be hidden behind closed doors. This was about clarity and accountability, and she wanted it to be seen. She stepped forward just a few feet away from the supervisor's counter. The supervisor swallowed hard and slowly lifted her eyes. Unable to avoid the moment any longer, the CEO didn't raise her voice. She didn't hurry. She simply began speaking with the same natural tone she had used from the very beginning. "What happened here today wasn't just about me," she said softly. "It was about how easily someone in your position can misuse their judgment." The supervisor opened her mouth, but the CEO continued gently before she could interrupt. "I never asked for special treatment," she said. "I stood in line like everyone else. I offered the same documents every customer uses. I followed every rule quietly." Few customers nodded subtly, confirming the truth of her words. "The problem," she continued, "is not that you were cautious. The problem is that you refused to even begin the process. You made a decision about me without checking anything." The supervisor lowered her eyes again, her face reddening. "You saw what I was wearing," the CEO said. "Still calm, and you decided I didn't belong? You didn't say it out loud, but your actions said it clearly." The supervisor took a shaky breath. "I didn't mean to offend you," she whispered. The CEO's expression remained gentle. "I believe you didn't intend to harm anyone. But intention doesn't erase the effect. Today, you judged someone unfairly. Tomorrow, it could be someone else. Someone who doesn't have the ability to call management with one phone call. Someone who might walk out of here feeling ashamed for no reason." The room was silent. Even the child in the lobby had stopped making noise, as though he sensed the seriousness. One manager stepped forward slightly. "We take this very seriously," he said to the CEO. "Your experience today is unacceptable." The CEO nodded. "This isn't just about policy," she said. "It's about respect. Every person who walks into this bank deserves the same courtesy, whether they are taking out $10 or $50,000. The supervisor blinked rapidly, almost like she was holding back tears. I see that now," she said softly. "I misjudged the situation. I should have checked the documents. I should have treated you like a customer instead of." She stopped herself again, unable to finish the sentence. The CEO didn't force her to. She simply said, "I hope you understand that what happened today is serious. I hope you learn from it." The manager cleared his throat gently. "We know this isn't something we can overlook," he said to the CEO. "We're prepared to move forward with your decision." The supervisor straightened suddenly, looking like she had been jolted by cold water. It was one thing to be corrected. It was quite another to realize that the outcome of your mistake rested in someone else's hands completely. The CEO didn't look at her with harshness. She looked at her like someone looking at a crossroads, one path leading to change, the other two consequences. But the CEO wasn't ready to speak her final decision yet. She took a moment, allowing the weight of the situation to settle. She turned slightly and looked around the bank again. Noticing the quiet eyes of the customers watching closely, she could tell some of them weren't just curious, they understood. They recognized the moment because they had lived versions of it before. Maybe not in a bank, but in stores, offices, or classrooms. Where someone had decided they didn't belong based only on appearance, the CEO took a breath and spoke once more. Her voice even softer than before, but somehow more powerful. "This could have been a quiet visit," she said. "It could have been a moment where we all move through our day with kindness. But sometimes life gives us situations not to embarrass anyone, but to open eyes, to show the truth. Not every lesson is easy." The supervisor finally whispered, "I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air, small but real. Yet the damage had already been done, and everyone knew it. The managers looked at the CEO again. They knew they couldn't delay the next step much longer. Decisions in situations like this mattered not because of the person she was, but because of the message it would send to everyone watching. The CEO nodded slowly, signaling that she was ready to address what came next. But she didn't rush. She took another moment to gather her thoughts, understanding that whatever she said now would shape how the day ended for the entire room. The supervisor stood completely still, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter, waiting for the outcome of the choice she had made earlier with so much confidence. And the bank, every employee, every customer, every quiet breath waited with her. The room felt heavier the longer she stood there. Not because anything bad was happening, but because everyone seemed to realize that their assumptions had led them in the wrong direction. The manager stayed close, watching her with a nervous respect, the kind usually saved for people far above his position. The staff worked quickly at the side counter, their hands moving carefully as if they didn't want to make even the smallest mistake. She didn't rush them. She didn't demand anything. She simply waited with the same calm expression she had worn since she walked into the bank for the very first time. Anyone looking at her would never guess she had been embarrassed only minutes earlier, or that she was the same person who had been doubted so easily by people who were supposed to serve every customer equally. As she stood there, she thought about how strange it was that life could shift so quickly. Sometimes everything changed in a way that felt sharp and painful. Other times, like now, the change was quiet but clear, almost like a gentle wave pushing everything into its proper place. She didn't want revenge, and she didn't want fear. What she wanted, more than anything, was understanding, because understanding was what helped people grow. The other customers in the bank kept glancing her way, pretending not to stare, even though their curiosity was obvious. Some of them wore awkward smiles, the kind people put on when they feel guilty but don't know how to express it. Others simply watched with wide eyes, trying to make sense of what they had overheard. They had seen her treated poorly. They had seen her stand quietly while it happened. And now they were seeing the entire situation turn around in a way none of them expected. She noticed two older women whispering near the chairs by the window. They kept looking at her, then at the manager, then back at her again. Their expressions were not unkind, just surprised. She could almost hear their thoughts even without hearing their voices. Asterisk, how could someone like her be someone important? How did everyone miss it? Asterisk, the truth was simple. Most people were used to deciding who someone was based on surface details. Clothes, shoes, skin, the way someone spoke, the way someone walked, the kind of phone they held. None of those things had ever defined her. They never would. A young teller approached her slowly, holding a bottle of water with both hands. She looked nervous, but sincere. "I thought you might want something to drink," the teller said softly. She smiled gently and accepted the bottle. "Thank you," she replied. Her voice was warm, not cold or sharp. The teller seemed relieved, almost as if she had expected to be scolded. Instead, she received kindness, and that kindness seemed to settle the air around them. For a few moments she stayed silent, thinking. She wanted to choose her words carefully before speaking again. The teller was waiting quietly beside her, unsure whether she should stay or step away. Finally, she looked at the teller and said, "It matters how you treat people, even when you think no one is watching." The teller nodded, her eyes lowering a little, not out of shame but out of understanding. "I'm really sorry for earlier," she whispered. "I know," the woman replied, "and I appreciate you saying that." The teller smiled a little, then slowly moved back to her station. The small exchange didn't erase what had happened, but it softened the edges of the moment. It allowed space for growth. It showed that even simple words, when spoken honestly, could shift a person's entire day. The manager cleared his throat lightly, standing a respectful distance away. "They're almost done preparing everything," he said. "If there's anything else you need, absolutely anything, please let me know." She nodded. "Thank you. I'll let you know." He stayed where he was, unsure whether he should leave or remain nearby. She gave him a small nod that quietly told him he could step back. He seemed grateful for the permission. He had handled the situation poorly at first, she knew that. But he was trying now, not because he feared consequences, but because he realized he had made assumptions without thinking them through. The bank door opened and closed as a few people came in and out, but the entire room seemed quieter than usual. Even the sound of printers and keyboards felt softer, as if everyone was trying not to disturb the moment. She took a small sip of water and let her thoughts drift. She remembered days when she was younger, when she worked 2 jobs and never had more than a few coins left at the end of the week. She remembered standing in lines like this one, tired and unsure of herself. She remembered being spoken to in the same careless tone she had heard earlier, the tone of someone who judged her before knowing anything about her life. Back then, she didn't have the confidence to correct people. She had stayed quiet, even when it hurt. But she had grown. Experience had shaped her. Success had taught her that she didn't need to prove anything, not even her worth. Now she stood here, calm and steady, not because of the money she had, but because of the strength she had earned over years of pushing through challenges no one else saw. She had learned the art of patience, the value of silence, the power of letting people reveal themselves through their actions at the side counter. The staff worked with intense focus. Papers were signed. Numbers were verified. Forms were stamped. It was a simple transaction, something she had done many times before, but today it meant something a little different. Today it was a reminder that respect shouldn't depend on what someone owns or what someone looks like. After several minutes, the teller who had been processing everything approached, carefully with a neat envelope in her hand. She held it with both hands, almost like it was something delicate. "Everything is ready," she said. Offering the envelope with a respectful bow of her head, the woman accepted it with a small smile. "Thank you." The teller hesitated, then spoke again. "I just want to say I'm sorry for earlier. Truly." She looked into the teller's eyes. They were honest, a little nervous, but filled with the desire to do better. "I accept your apology," she said gently, "and I hope today teaches you something important." The teller nodded quickly. It really has." The room seemed to exhale when the envelope exchanged hands, as if everyone had been waiting for that moment. People shifted in their seats. Others pretended to look at their phones. No one really knew what to say, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was simply thoughtful. The manager stepped forward again. "Would you like me to walk you out?" He asked, his posture straighter than before. "No," she said kindly. "I can walk myself out." He nodded respectfully. "If you ever need any assistance in the future, please come directly to me." "I'll remember that," she replied. She placed the envelope into her bag, took another sip of water, and then slowly started walking toward the door. Every step she took felt lighter, not because anything magical had happened, but because she had chosen to carry the moment with grace instead of anger. That was something she always tried to do, even when people didn't see it. As she reached the doorway, a man who had been sitting quietly near the exit stood up. He looked to be in his mid-40s, dressed in simple clothes, the kind of person most people would overlook in a crowd. He stepped aside to let her pass, giving her a polite nod. "You handled all of that better than most would have," he said softly. She offered him a small smile. "Thank you. It teaches all of us something," he added. "I think everyone in here learned something today." She nodded gently. "I hope so." When she stepped outside, the air felt fresh. It was warm, but not uncomfortable, with a soft breeze that brushed against her face. The sky above was clear, a soft blue that made the entire street look calm. People walked by with shopping bags, coffee cups, and hurried steps. Unaware of the moment that had just taken place behind those glass doors, she paused for a moment on the sidewalk, letting herself breathe. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't bitter. What she felt was something more meaningful: clarity. She had spent her whole life working hard to build something that mattered, something that would help others. But moments like these reminded her why she continued doing the work she did. It wasn't about power or status. It wasn't about titles or money. It was about breaking old patterns, showing people a better way to treat each other, and reminding them that everyone carried a story they couldn't see just by looking at the surface. As she prepared to cross the street, her phone buzzed softly. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from one of her senior employees, asking if she needed anything else handled regarding the situation. She typed a short reply. *No. Everything is fine. Thank you. Asterisk. She slipped her phone back into her bag and continued down the sidewalk. Her steps were steady and unhurried. She didn't need to go back to her office right away. She didn't need to call anyone. The situation was already moving toward resolution in a way that didn't require her to lift another finger. She reached the corner of the street and waited for the light to change. A little girl holding her mother's hand looked up at her with a bright smile. She smiled back. The innocence in the child's eyes reminded her that kindness came naturally to people before the world taught them otherwise. When the light changed, she crossed the street slowly, blending into the flow of pedestrians. The city around her buzzed with life. Sounds of traffic, street vendors, hurried footsteps, distant conversations, all of it flowed together into a familiar rhythm. She felt at peace within it. By the time she reached the small cafe at the end of the block, she decided to stop for a moment. Not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to take a small break before heading back to the rest of her day. She walked inside and ordered a simple drink. The barista didn't know who she was, didn't judge her, didn't question her. He treated her with the same respect he gave every customer. And the simplicity of that felt refreshing. She found a seat near the window and watched as people walked by outside. Every person carried their own worries, dreams, fears, and hopes. And none of those things were visible from the outside. It reminded her why patience mattered so much. Why empathy mattered. Why taking a few seconds to understand someone could change everything? She sipped her drink slowly. The quiet inside the cafe gave her space to reflect. She didn't replay the earlier moments with frustration. Instead, she thought about how the staff had apologized, how they had learned something, how the atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to thoughtful. She believed people could grow. She believed people could change. And she believed that moments like the one in the bank were important because they helped people wake up to their own assumptions. Before she finished her drink, she heard her phone buzz again. Another message. This time it was a short update from the person she had called earlier, the person who now oversaw all interactions between her company and the bank. The message said, asterisk, everything is being handled. Policies are being reviewed. Staff evaluations are underway. Asterisk, she read it calmly, then set her phone down. She didn't feel proud or victorious. She simply felt steady. She never wanted people to lose their jobs without reason. She never wanted to punish anyone out of anger. But she also believed in accountability. She knew that growth required honest correction. As she prepared to leave the cafe, she took one last look out the window. The street was still moving, still buzzing, still alive with stories she would never know. She stood up, placed her cup in the bin, and made her way to the door. When she stepped outside again, the sun felt warm on her face. She took a deep breath and started walking toward the parking lot down the block. There was still more of the day ahead, more responsibilities waiting for her, more people counting on her. The moment in the bank was behind her now, but its lesson would stay with everyone who witnessed it. And as she walked, her steps remained steady and confident, not because anyone was watching, not because she needed to prove anything, but because that was simply who she was. A person who moved with purpose, with calm strength, and with the quiet belief that dignity didn't need to be loud to be powerful. She reached her car, unlocked it, and sat inside for a moment before starting the engine. Another breath, another quiet pause, another reminder that no matter what happened around her, she would always choose grace over anger, understanding over pride, and patience over judgment. Then she turned the key, pulled out of the parking space, and merged back into the flow of the city, ready for whatever came next, unaware that the true consequences of the incident were still unfolding behind her, and that the staff inside the bank were facing a day they would never forget. The drive back to her office was calm, almost peaceful. The city moved around her in its usual rhythm. But she wasn't thinking about traffic or the long list of tasks waiting for her. Instead, her mind stayed on what had happened at the bank, how strangely life had a way of teaching lessons even when no one planned them. She didn't replay the moment out of anger. She replayed it because she understood that sometimes the things people needed to learn didn't come wrapped in big speeches or dramatic scenes. They came quietly, through unexpected moments that forced people to look at themselves. And the morning at the bank had been one of those moments for everyone in that room. When she arrived at her office building, security guard at the front desk greeted her the same way he always did. "Good afternoon," he said warmly, with a nod full of respect. She returned the smile, appreciating the consistency of his kindness. He didn't treat her differently based on clothing or mood or assumption. That kind of person was rare, and she always noticed it. Inside the elevator, she stood alone, listening to the soft hum of the machine as it rose to the top floor. She watched the numbers change. Each floor represented a part of her journey. Years ago, she would have never imagined having an entire floor of a building to run her company. She had started from a small rented room with peeling paint and old furniture. Now she was here, leading hundreds of employees who relied on her guidance. As she entered her office suite, her assistant immediately stood. "You're back," he said with relief. "We heard something happened at the bank. Are you okay?" She offered a calm smile. "I'm fine." He hesitated, then nodded. He knew her well enough to understand that if she said she was fine, she wasn't trying to hide anything. She simply didn't want to dwell on it. "There are a few things you need to review," he said, handing her a tablet with files. "Also, the team from the bank called twice asking if you wanted a meeting to discuss." "Well, everything." She shook her head. "No meeting. They can send whatever they need to send. I'm not giving the situation more attention than it deserves." "Understood," he replied, stepping back with the quiet professionalism she appreciated. She entered her private office and closed the door gently behind her. The room smelled faintly of fresh paper and a hint of the candle she'd like to keep on her desk. Large windows stretched across the wall behind her chair, offering a view of the city. From up high, everything looked smaller, calmer. It's easier to understand. She placed her bag on the couch and took a seat at her desk. For a few minutes, she didn't open the files. She simply sat quietly, reminding herself that even the strongest days needed pauses. Her thoughts drifted back to the faces in the bank, the tense expressions, the apologies, the shift in energy. She wondered if the staff members were talking amongst themselves right now, trying to make sense of what had happened. She wondered if they were feeling embarrassed or nervous about what would come next. She didn't want them to be scared. Fear didn't teach anything, not the right things at least. What she hoped was that they would grow. After a moment, she powered on her computer and began reading through the tasks, waiting for her contracts, proposals, updates from different departments. Everything was moving as usual, the way it always did. But even as she typed responses and reviewed documents, her mind kept returning to one question. How could she turn this morning's moment into something meaningful without turning it into a story of shame? Because that mattered to her. Anyone could punish people. Anyone could fire staff. Anyone could cause fear. But true leadership wasn't about who could speak the loudest or enforce the strictest rule. True leadership was about raising people higher, giving them a chance to be better. As she worked, her phone buzzed again. It was her employee from earlier with another update. This time, the message was longer. Asterisk, we've reviewed the initial details. The bank administration is requesting a formal conversation. The staff members involved have been temporarily reassigned. They have also requested guidance on new training procedures. Please advise. Asterisk, she looked at the message for a long moment, then typed a simple response. Asterisk, create training that teaches respect, empathy, and proper verification. No punishment beyond what is necessary. People learn through correction, not fear. Asterisk, she hit send. For several minutes, she continued working quietly, focusing on the tasks that required her immediate attention. Even though the morning had been tense, she didn't let it disturb the rest of her day. She believed in balance. She believed in moving forward. Around mid-afternoon, she stood and walked toward the window. She placed both hands on the railing and looked out across the city. Cars moved like tiny dots. People walked like little figures in the distance. From up here, it was easy to forget how heavy life felt when you were standing in it. Up here, everything seemed clearer. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She reminded herself that the day was still young. There were still opportunities to turn the morning's lesson into something positive. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Her assistant peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt," he said gently, "but there's someone here to see you." "He said you know him." She raised a brow. "Who is it?" "He said he's from the bank." She took a slow breath, then nodded. "Send him in." A moment later, the man entered her office. He wasn't the manager from earlier. He was older, with graying hair and a kind but anxious expression. His suit was neat, his hands laced together nervously in front of him. "Thank you for seeing me," he said as he stepped forward. "I'm the regional director for the branch you visited this morning." She offered a polite nod but didn't ask him to sit. Not yet. She wanted to understand why he was here first. "I came because—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Because what happened today shouldn't have happened, and I needed to apologize in person." She studied him. His apology wasn't rushed or rehearsed. It sounded sincere. "I appreciate you coming," she said softly. He exhaled, relieved she hadn't dismissed him. "I spoke with the staff after you left. They are shaken. Not because they fear losing their jobs, but because they realized how blind they were in that moment. They asked me to tell you they're truly sorry. And the bank wants to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." She nodded slowly. "That's what matters." "We're reviewing training," he continued. "We're adjusting our procedures. And if you have any recommendations, we're willing to implement them." She thought for a moment, then said, "Teach them to see people, not assumptions. That's all." His shoulders relaxed, as if her words gave him direction. "We will," he said, with a small bow of respect. "Is that all you wanted to say?" she asked, not unkindly. He hesitated. "There's one more thing," he said. "They asked if you would be willing to come speak with the staff someday. Not as the owner of a company, but as a person who was affected by their mistake. They believe hearing from you directly would help them learn." She took a slow, thoughtful breath. She wasn't someone who enjoyed calling out mistakes in public. She didn't like making people feel small, but she did believe in learning. And she believed in offering people a chance to become better. "I'll think about it," she said gently. "That's all we ask," he replied with gratitude. She motioned toward a chair, silently inviting him to sit. He did, grateful for her kindness. They spoke for a few minutes more, not about punishment or consequences, but about growth, respect, and the importance of humility. When he finally left, he shook her hand with both of his, a gesture full of sincerity. When the door closed behind him, she returned to her desk and sat down slowly. She let out a quiet breath. The morning's tension was easing, turning into something softer, something constructive. She felt grateful for that. The rest of the afternoon moved steadily. Meetings, emails, small decisions, larger decisions. Each task helped pull her attention forward. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting warm light across her office floor, she was ready to wrap up the day before leaving. She took a moment to sit quietly in the stillness of her office. The light was golden, touching the edges of her desk like a gentle reminder that every day had its own ending. And every ending led to something new. She gathered her things and headed down to the lobby. The security guard waved goodbye, and she returned the gesture. Outside, the air felt cooler. The sky had shifted to soft pastel colors. The sound of traffic blended with the faint laughter of people heading home. She walked to her car slowly, not because she was tired, but because she wanted to enjoy the quiet of the evening. When she reached the car, she paused before opening the door. Her phone buzzed again with a message from her employee. Asterisk, the bank director called. "He said you were gracious. The staff is relieved." Asterisk, she smiled at the message, then typed a short reply. "Good. Let them grow from this." She put her phone away and began the drive home. Streetlights flickered on as she passed. The sky shifted from gold to indigo, and the day settled into night. Her thoughts drifted once more not to the embarrassment she felt earlier, not to the way the staff had panicked after learning who she was, but to the way people could change when they were given the chance. She believed in second chances. She believed in guiding people through mistakes instead of punishing them for it. And she believed that the morning had offered everyone involved a moment they would carry with them for a long time. When she arrived home, she unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet comfort of her living room. She placed her bag on the table, changed into comfortable clothes, and made herself a warm drink. She sat by the window, sipping slowly as she watched the city lights glow in the distance. She felt at peace. The day had been unexpected. It had been heavy in some moments, surprisingly calm in others, but every part of it had carried meaning. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new decisions, but she also knew she would face them with the same steady strength she had carried all day. And somewhere across the city, tied a brightly lit bank branch. The staff members were likely gathered together, talking quietly, reflecting, realizing how close they had come to losing their jobs, but also how grateful they were for the grace they had been shown.